This review might ruffle a few feathers because I just want people to first and foremost step back and say that over the course of a season, because you watch FC Barcelona more than any other club, that's why you're watching this video too, that every club does have ups and downs. You could be a Chelsea fan at the moment, having spent the money you did and then being in 10th place at the Premier League. Barcelona is still atop of the Liga. But this, along with the Champions League, the Europa League in the same week, this is one of the worst matches of the season and arguably the worst played match that FC Barcelona have had all year long when you consider who was across the line from them. So you also understand my frustration when I felt like I had to watch it a second time just to understand what went wrong. And it always does take a lot longer to kind of diagnose a dumpster fire than it does to celebrate when Barcelona are doing things well and you can say, oh, there's that one moment this player turned on the ball, Barcelona are through, and they score a goal. They didn't score a goal today. Almería scored one, and that's why we're talking about the 5 headlines of Barcelona's 1-0 loss to Almería. Headline 1 is win 1-0, lose 1-0. The title race is still 7. Barcelona is still in a comfortable lead, and it would be shocking, yes shocking, if they managed to hand over the Liga to Real Madrid. But yes, crazier things have happened, and Barcelona have got to be vigilant because without Pedri, things are going to get more difficult, and that is going to be a theme not only through this match, but for every match that Barcelona struggles in until he returns. Barca's back line has been on a razor's edge this season. More so with Araujo and Koundé, and Xavi decided to rotate them both today. For Koundé, it was probably good that he was rotated because of the difficult week that he had, just give him a mental break as much as the physical one. And for Araujo, well, he had that tightness that was the worry against United, that's why he came off. So to have him have to come off the bench in some kind of hero effort was concerning to say the least. In theory, the foursome of Alba, Eric, Christensen, and Roberto, they should have been able to handle an Almería side that shipped 9 goals in their last 2 games. That was 6 of which coming against Girona. You can say that Alba and Eric and Roberto all stink. And I don't think many Culés would disagree to the fact that the depth around the margins has got to be better if Barcelona are going to do some damage in Europe. Because Alba and Roberto and Eric, they did all stink today. As did Busquets, as did Kessie, as did the whole team. But those names should still be good enough to take down Almería. That's the point. Does this compromise the Liga? Well, I would say not yet. But talk to me when it's 5, that being the lead. But more importantly, now that Copa del Rey match midweek gives some of the mental edge back to Real Madrid. Sure, they drew against 10 men Atleti, but that 1-1 probably feels a whole lot better than Barca's 1-0 loss. And I did say it against United. Barca are missing quality down its bench to compete in Europe. Full stop. They are 3 to 5 players short of that mission. But that's where you lose me. Alonso, Eric, Roberto, Alba, Kessie, Ansu, Ferran Torres, Pablo Torre, Angel Alarcón. That is a deep enough and good enough bench to be first or second or first in the Liga. So that is where you do kind of lose me on the argument that these players are all to be thrown out. That group should be good enough to win the Liga against a Real Madrid side always more concerned with Champions League. Those players aren't trash. They're good enough for the Liga. That's why I don't pin the solutions to this match on throwing out individual players, but throwing out the entire team's performance. It was all 11 players on the field today. They were coming off that emotional loss to United, and that's no excuse. They didn't bring the intensity they needed to, they weren't up to the level today, and they suffered for it in the standings. 2 is Relegation Fighters. I do want to give, as I always do, a little bit of credit to Almería, the opponent for Barcelona today. I know that La Liga is weaker. I know that there are no big names that get your attention in this 11 for Almería or even on their bench, but they stood up to Barca physically and mentally. Because remember, it's not just about Barca every match. The desperation in the home side was apparent from the opening whistle, and they do have the 3rd best record at home this season of any team in the Liga. They started the day in the relegation zone after positive results this weekend for Valencia and Cadiz. They needed at least a point, but 3 points has taken them out of the drop zone. And that wasn't a team that had gotten points off Barcelona in 13 years. But if they had a team that was going to do so, it'd be a team with a lot of familiar faces. The manager Rubi, Sergi Akiemi, and Chumi, a manager and players with something to prove. As well as Luis Suarez, the Colombian one, finally having that match I always expected him to have against Barca while he was at Granada. Almeria's front 2, and we'll talk about Torre in a second, moved so well together. Suarez got the better of Christensen at times, and he gave Roberto more than he could handle. If you're going to defend like that and give up possession not being Almería, you have to have forwards that can win some duels and hold up the ball for any length of time. Almería, from their frantic defenders to their disciplined midfielders, also trusted their forwards to relieve some of the pressure. Rubi's game plan worked perfectly because all the individuals that he asked to do individual jobs fulfilled their roles perfectly in a way that Barcelona's players did not. Headline 3 is Eric Garcia gets worked. I know I said I wasn't going to go after individuals, it was a team performance, and I think that 0 for Barcelona is a lot about the team. As far as that 1 for Almería, my eyes do go to Eric Garcia. Because Almeria's game plan was pretty simple from minute 1 on. It was counterattack, it was get out to the wings, hold the ball for just a second, don't turn it over, and then attack through the middle. This is where we get to talking about the center forward, Alberto Torre, who holds it up against Eric Garcia, and that's a foul that he usually commits in that position. But then it goes back out to the wing, where then an immediate ball back to him over the top as he spun off Eric, a move that Eric Garcia fell for. Then he finishes. Torre does. Power over position against Ter Stegen for the first goal. Maybe it's minutes, maybe it's lack of form, but it continues to be a repeat offense for Eric Garcia. And I'm surprised that he didn't commit the foul initially on the build-up to that goal, but he did it in the 35th minute, and he gets a yellow card for his troubles. 38th minute, he let the ball run and got his pocket picked by Torre. Defensively, it continues to be a concern. And man, it does kill me. People know how I've defended Eric Garcia in the past, and when you see that the club is renewing Roberto, which many disagree with, but they're renewing Roberto, I think for Xavi on the grounds that A, he has a lot of versatility as a player, but B, he's an important Catalan leader, he's an important player who wants to play for the club, and who can show younger players what it means to play for FC Barcelona, and that goes a long way with Xavi and this board. And Eric, I think, is almost the same thing, but unfortunately for him, he's too young and not good enough to have a locker room leadership position. And his showings on the field and placed in the depth chart are not a great spot for him. People say ship him out, but I still think the recently turned 22-year-old still has room to grow, but it's not at Barça. I can admit that now in February of this season. This was one where he's supposed to get a few minutes, but at this point, I think he should go out on loan. I think it's the best thing for him. Looking at his age, his salary, and his market value, going from Man City to Barcelona and now to who knows where, Barcelona would be selling extremely low on him. And again, with his wages, it doesn't do too much damage to Barcelona's wage bill. It's the big spenders that they have to worry about. So he's actually most valuable to FC Barcelona at the moment than any other club. So I think you hold on to him, and then if you're selling him next summer, you do it at the same number that you'd sell him for this summer, or maybe a little bit more. Because he needs to play, he needs to go out, figure out who he is, get his confidence, and really fix all those mistakes. Because it hurts me offensively because of all those players that were moving the ball quickly on the ground and trying to break through Almería with good ideas and quick and fast ideas. Eric Garcia was one of the only ones on the field. Offensively, when Barca are in possession, it makes a ton of sense why he's in this team. But those defensive mistakes are too much, and he's a liability when he's out there, even against Almería. So for Eric Garcia, he's got to figure this out, and I just don't think that's going to happen in FC Barcelona's first team, at least for the next season or two. Headline 4 is looking tired. You can fault Eric Garcia for the goal, but as I've said before, that 0 on the other side, I think that's way worse to talk about the overall performance that FC Barcelona had. Eric, whether it's minutes or out of form, as I said, has a little bit of an excuse, and he knows he got undressed on that goal, but I don't know what everybody else's excuse was today. The movement of the ball, the speed of the ball going horizontally, the level of the touches, the passing, the quality, it was all just awful today for Barcelona. And that does lead me to talk a little bit about those crosses. The crosses of Alba weren't good enough. After some decent showings, Alba today showed that he has been leagues behind Balde now in the last 3 weeks, after 2 or 3 weeks of good showings. And it's a bit shocking too, because it's the vice captain, it's the older player, the one who's been inconsistent this season, as opposed to Balde, who I think has just been continuing to be on an uphill trajectory and one of the few bright spots against Manchester United in that second leg. While the crosses from Alba were bad, fortunately, I thought the crosses from Ferran Torres were much better, and he was able to take the performance against Cadiz last weekend and have an okay game. Again, one of the bright positive signs, if you can call that any at all, but I'm just trying to split straws on who played well or who played just above subpar, and I think Ferran Torres was the answer to that. He landed a ball in for Eric once, Lewandowski then just couldn't connect it another one, and Ferran had some decent crosses in the second half too. The one that was wasted by Araujo, good on Araujo to get himself into position, but yeah, Ferran was delivering those balls and Barca really couldn't finish. Almería, to their credit, did well to clear their lines and did well to be physical in the box to deal with those crosses without committing fouls. Because Almería knew what Barca were going to do, they knew what was coming, it was much easier to anticipate what they had to do next to keep that offside line that worked to good effect on multiple occasions, that being Almería's. And even late in the game, Rodrigo Eli, he made one little mistake at the end, but almost everything else for him was perfect in this match, and arguably he was the man of the match. Something that Ferran Torres did last week that I wish he had done even more of this week, but it's hard to argue that he was the only one for Barcelona who did it, was he was willing to take on Almería defenders, particularly on the wings. 3 of 4 of his dribbles came off, and if anything, you want to see more of that from him. Then when Rafinha came on, I don't know what the instructions were for him. I know he was set up a bit more in the middle to try to play in between those lines, but you could clearly see that nobody was in between those lines for Barcelona, and Almería was able to step together in those units, especially after they scored that goal when they were in that 5-3-2. They were just stepping in tandem, and it almost looked easy for Almería to defend what little ideas Barcelona had. And in between those lines too, it was unfortunate because Xavi was not impactful in this game in the slightest. In that first half, he was totally suffocated out of the game, and he had absolutely no room to turn. No outlets from his teammates either, so a little bit of blame to them, and he was dispossessed more times than anybody in a Blaugrana shirt. I don't know if it was him being out of rhythm, but I don't know. It seemed like the game got to him in a way that it did last year than it hasn't been this year. He's been much more mature. But the way he picked up the yellow card, now he's going to miss the match against Valencia next weekend, coming after missing that second leg against Manchester United. I'm not sure. Yeah, it was frustrating. It's a sad thing if you feel like Gabi is going backwards. And I think more than anybody else, Gabi and Lewandowski, their spacing, that being the spacing of Gabi in that horizontal space, and then Lewandowski with the service he gets, those two are both desperate to have Dembele and Pedri come back, just for a spacing sense and an ability that those players have to get them the ball in more advantageous positions. And there's certainly some debate here on Lewandowski too. My question is it Lewandowski's job to move around or to be really mobile, to drop in deep and things like that against that kind of back five line, especially after Almería scored? I don't think so. His job is to occupy those two center backs and get his head on a ball. And the way that he almost took two away from Araujo, maybe Barcelona has some kind of goal if Araujo and Lewandowski communicated better with the ball in the air. But Lewandowski was desperate for that goal. Fair to him. Fair play. It's his job to get those goals. But yeah, I'm not really sure what we're asking him to do here. I know people said his first touch was poor, sure, but I didn't think it was any worse than it has been throughout the entire season when he was scoring goals or not. I think the difference with him is if he puts the ball in the back of the net, everybody celebrates. If he doesn't, then they get on him. Today was a day when he didn't do it, but today was frustrating because he wasn't even close. I talked about Pedri before. I talked about Dembele. He is sorely missing those two players more than anybody else on that field. And headline 5 is the one that I think we're going to talk a little bit more on the podcast, was Xavi's changes, his decisions, his tactics as the game went on. Whether it was the 1-0 when they were down, they were looking for something else. Barcelona basically played in 4 phases, all of which were unsuccessful, which is, I think, is the biggest concern for Xavi. It never looked in those 4 phases like Barcelona were coming up with any new ideas. The first phase obviously was in the first half when they had that midfield 4. As I said before, it wasn't working because there was nobody getting in between those lines. Then there was a change in formation at halftime. Rafinha comes on for Kessie, and Barcelona, the idea was to get more direct against an Almería back line that settled, as I said, into that 5-3-2 low block, and Rubi certainly fortified defensively in the second half. But still, without Pedri, they weren't really solving any problems at being Barcelona. And it wasn't just because of his build-up, but Pedri's late goals in the last 2 months, those slim margins of 1-0 with a goal from Pedri and losing 1-0 without him, now you are seeing truly the impact of Pedri. And I had people last time I said this argue that Lewandowski is still, or Ter Stegen is still the MVP of Barcelona this season. I think more people said Lewandowski because of the goals he scored. But I also want to reiterate to you that Barcelona do not get those 1-0s. Yes, it's Lewandowski. But as far as those game-winning goals and those important moments, Pedri and Ter Stegen, I think, have saved more points for Barcelona than Lewandowski has earned them points. And you can argue all you want with me, but you see when Pedri is missing what this team looks like. Even without Lewandowski, when he was suspended for those 2 games in January, Barcelona figured some things out. They had some ideas. Yes, they were missing him, but it seemed like the structure, the system was still functioning. And yes, the goal scoring of Lewandowski was important. They were missing that. But for Pedri, it seemed like the whole system crumbles. And that's what makes him, to me, my most valuable player, if you will, or the player that Barcelona are missing the most. Then we go to that third phase where Marcos Alonso comes on and they switch, that being Barcelona, to 3 at the back. And that pushes Alba farther forward with Alonso, Christensen, Alba at the back. And Araujo doesn't really get his day off as you'd expected after he had that tighten against United, as I already mentioned. And then that fourth phase comes when Barcelona are pushing for the equalizer. Araujo pushes forward to be a center forward the way Piqué used to. Pablo Torre comes on and Angel Alarcón both come on. And there's an argument from the few minutes they had that they should have been put on the field quicker, because Busquets just wasn't his day, and Pablo Torre immediately was moving the ball a bit quicker than Busquets and a bit more direct. Alarcón the same way. He was fighting, he was winning the ball back, and even if he was making little mistakes here and there, he immediately won that free kick by taking on Babistão. And the reason why you see the most young wingers, that's the position where you see the youngest players, is because those players are asked to be fearless. Those players don't know any better, so they just go at the opposition, and as long as they're not turning the ball over at midfield, as long as you turn it over in the final third, especially for a high-pressing team like Barcelona, you can get the ball back. So I would have liked to see Alarcón on way earlier in this game because of the effort that he provided. On the ensuing free kick too, Torre, it was a good delivery. Ball landed at the feet of Alarcón, and then he got the shot off, but at least it was something. And again, that final idea by Xavi to have Araujo come forward, that being Araujo close to it in the last 5 minutes, but the ball had too much zip and Araujo was just behind it. But again, when Ronald Araujo is not on the field, Barcelona aren't as good. And I think that's something that you're seeing to go back to the depth and the quality and all those things we talk about in Manchester United. To go back to the whole thesis of this, and we'll talk about more on the podcast tomorrow. The quality of Barcelona's bench should have beaten Almería today. It should be good enough to rotate. Yes, they're not good enough at being the full squad for Europe. You get 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 injuries, and you're in a world of hurt. My disappointment today is that without Pedri and Dembele, and even Gavi coming back, but without Pedri and Dembele, and Araujo starting on the bench, Barcelona were not themselves, and they lost to a team that was in a relegation zone. That's my concern. That you take out 3 players from the equation, and this Barcelona team runs out of ideas, and it's just not good enough against a team that you have to take care of business against if you're going to win the Liga. So yeah, there's my disappointment. We'll talk more about it on the podcast. But as always, until next time, Forza Barça.